Welcome back to Conversing over Drinks with your host, Cedric Turner. Today we have a special guest, Miss Keri Cooper. She is a holistic psychotherapist working daily with the ups and downs of teens and young adults. And for this being a very new thing to me, I'm going to let her further explain that to you guys.
Thank you so much. So, the first thing's always like, what's a holistic psychotherapist? So I was a very traditionally trained therapist for the last 25 years. But around 15 years ago, I thought that we were missing something. I was working with teens and children, and they were getting better, but not 100%. And I kept on feeling like we're missing a puzzle piece. And finally, I realized that it's about their daily habits and their daily routines, and their physical health impacts their mental health. So we need to talk about things like, what are they eating? Are they outside? Are they exercising? Are they sleeping? So I went back and actually became a certified health coach so I could talk about this. And I went back and became a certified sleep science coach so I could talk about this. So I think that, when we look at kids and really adults too, you can't talk about mental health unless you're also talking about the physical health because it impacts you so much.
Oh yeah, and that's something that I never thought about, especially growing up. Grew up a country boy, grew up in the South. It was, you wake up, you work, you eat what's available, and then you go back to sleep. And even as a teen, when I got into those years, I didn't sleep that much. Just never did. I was always playing ball. It was weird. My dad would always say it. He was like, "You sleep 4 or 5 hours, but you never seem tired." I was like, "I don't know. It's just the way I keep going, I guess." But that is very telling for this young group now, this younger generation, because every generation seems to believe that the generation that follows them is extremely softer than they were when they were growing up. And this generation kind of has a handicap. We talked about it earlier, but they kind of have a handicap because they grew up with social media. They grew up with things like
with
that.
phones and being inside and, being really disconnected from community. When we were growing up, it's like you were outside. People were always outside and like
All the time.
all the time. And as kids, you played without adults really kind of monitoring and interfering constantly,
Yeah.
which is actually important because it teaches kids how to solve their own problems and how to figure things out on their own. And now it's like all very organized play dates and, stuff like that. It's not that free flowing, like kids are just going to go play and figure out their own rules.
Yeah. And most of my buddies now, they're married with children and their kids are getting to that pre-K kindergarten age. So they're starting to go to school. And I'm talking to my buddy is always funny to me because some of them will ask me for advice and I'm like, I don't even have kids, but I've been teaching for so long. Basically been working with kids since I was 15. So about 2 decades now.
Yeah.
And it's just, like, I'll tell them, I was like, man, the kids change all the time. You got to adapt to them. But it's also, I see the way that the kids are, and I'm just kind of, it's amazing to me, and it's also frustrating at the same time, because I'm like, we didn't do that. Like, so like we went outside. Like, we went and had fun. Like, I couldn't imagine sitting on my phone during practice or during class or anything like that. But that's just how they're wired now. And it's very telling to hear from somebody else who is trying to help them adjust to that.
Yeah, I mean, the phones especially, they're so addicting. They take up so much of their lives. And again, everything is about like instant gratification. Like even when you think back to when we grew up watching TV, you had to
Yeah.
wait till the next week for the next episode.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's like they could just binge a whole season right away. They just see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's like there's no waiting ever for them. It's just like instant. Like I need to know the answer to something. I'm going to instantly Google it. I'm hungry.
Yeah.
I'm going to DoorDash it. Like everything is instant.
Yeah, that's wild. Like, the TV show thing is cool with me being, like, when I got being older now. It's like, man, they tell me about a show and I'm like, I'm gonna wait till they're like 3 or 4 seasons deep and then I'll start watching it because then I can just watch it as it goes instead of waiting for it. It's like,
Right.
but it's like seeing the teens now, Like I remember talking to one of my high school classes, and my students were like, "Well, Mr. Cedric, when did you have a phone?" And I was like, "Man, I didn't have a phone until my freshman year of college. Like I was." I was in college before I had a phone. I was like, and then I said something about MySpace, and they called me an old head. They were like, oh. I was like, man, y'all don't even understand. I was like, MySpace. I was like, trying to get in the top eight back in the day, trying to get in the top eight of MySpace. That was life. I was like, but it was. I was like, y'all are just their growth is so much faster, and they're understanding things that they don't need to understand at certain ages, and it's because of their phones and their social media. And I was telling one of my buddies, I was like, bro, I was like, could you imagine? I feel bad for him because I'm like, could you imagine growing up in this era? Because I was like, stuff we did in our era, if they did that today, it would be horrific. I was like, just think about your mama jokes. I was like, we used to crack your mama jokes all the time, and it was just roasting each other. Basically, we were just roasting each other, having fun. I was like, but now they mamas got OnlyFans and all this other stuff. If they roasted your mama and they send a clip of it in the, that's a whole nother thing now. And I'm just terrified for them.
Right. And now it's all there for like life.
Yeah.
Everything they type, it's there.
Yeah.
You know, we said it all verbally. No one could track it. There were no cameras. There was, now it's completely different.
It's a wild world for them. I feel for them sometimes. I'm like, man, y'all just, but then it's like, if we put them through that, like if we took it away from them, like, I don't know how they would survive that either, because.
Right. And, that's the world we're living in. Like we do have these devices. That is something that we do have, but we also now have debilitating anxiety in most of our teenagers. Like this is a problem. And, it's not just about the phones. It's about so much more that these kids, they're not getting outside. They're, barely exercising. They're eating absolute garbage all day long. Like even their food is completely different than what we grew up eating. Like we didn't grow up drinking Starbucks every morning before school.
Nah, man, I was talking to a friend about this the other day, because even being here in Japan, I was like, bro, I see like 4 or 5-year-olds walking around with cups of coffee, and I'm like, we weren't even thinking about coffee until we were in our teens. I was like, I wasn't thinking about coffee till freshman year of high school. And I was like, the only reason I was thinking about coffee is because my coach drank it every morning. And I was like, what are you doing, man? I'm like, what is that? And he's like, it's coffee. And I'm like, what is coffee? And he's like, it gives you energy. I was like, all right.
Sounds good, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, you have to look at like just everything that's changed in their worlds and what's going on with it now. So when I get kids in my office who have, anxiety or depression, it's always like, all right, what are some of the first few steps we could take? Like, let's get your sleep schedule back where it should be. Because you brought up the preschool age, our teenagers, when they don't get enough sleep, it's like a toddler who didn't nap. Like they melt down. It's the same thing. Like they need sleep. So, it's about like, let's get your sleep back in schedule, because they're on their phones sometimes till 2 a.m, 3 a.m. And then are waking up super early for school. Like they're just sleep deprived.
And that's what I also want to talk about. Like, when does it come in on the parents to, like, because like, I know there's some of my buddies as parents, they're very against screen time with their younger ones. They're like, hey, look, we limited to like 30 minutes, like, and that's it. Like, other than that, face-to-face interaction, they're dealing with us, they're playing outside, they're doing something else. But then I know some parents that use that as a secondary babysitter, and they're like, oh, they're screaming, I'm going to give them the phone. I'm going to give them the tablet. And when do we like start to talk about that adding in? Because as weird as it says, like I'm a kid who grew up in the system. I grew up in a system because of child abuse, and I think about it now, and I'm like, child abuse has evolved from the physical and verbal to the non-neglectful. Because I was like, I feel like parents who just get their kids tablets and stuff, that's a form of child abuse, because you're just trying not to be a parent.
Yeah, it's hard because, parenting is hard. It's a lot of work.
It's kids raising kids.
It's hard. So, to put those boundaries in place and to say,
Yeah.
no, you can't have your iPad. And yeah, I'm going to sit here and listen to you scream instead is a really hard choice, but one that we do have to make, especially when they're younger. I see all the time, families out to dinner and the kids have iPads in front of them.
Yeah.
This is dinner. Like, would
Yeah.
I like to have an adult conversation with my husband when my kids were young? Sure. But when you go out to dinner, like, that's not the time. Like, you have to engage the whole family. Throwing them on an
Yeah.
iPad isn't helpful. And it's not helpful for their social skills either. Because when you sit down for that family dinner, that's how they learn to communicate, to talk to adults, to, pause, to not interrupt. Like, we're not allowing them to use those skills when we just put an iPad in front of them when they're young.
Yeah. So as a teen, if I'm a teen and I'm coming into your office and I'm saying, hey, Miss Cooper, I'm having a hard time adjusting right now. There's things going on. Like, what are the first things you're like, hey, let's talk about this, this, and this? Like, how do you evaluate a teen or a young adult to help them hit the areas they need to hit?
Right. Well, that's really different based upon what's really troubling them at the moment, So it's like, where are they really struggling? What do they want to see their life look like? And then we kind of break it down into what can you control right now? That's something I go back to a lot. I can't solve a potential problem that may or may not happen next month.
Yeah.
And that's where our anxiety goes. Our anxiety is always worried about what may or may not happen down the road. And I always say to all of them, you got to bring it back to the present. What can we control right now in the present moment? Can we control what time you're going to bed? Can we control what you're eating tomorrow? Can we control if you're going to set a goal for yourself of working out tomorrow? Can we control, who you're going to talk to and engage with tomorrow? Where can we start? Because it's how we live our every day that shapes how we feel.
Yeah. So you're basically just giving them a way to have control when they don't feel like they have it.
Yeah, because they have way more control than what they realize. They just don't feel like they're in control sometimes.
Well, and that's hard as a teen. I was like, that was hard when we were teens to feel like you're in control. Like, I never felt like I was in control. Like, I felt like my dad had control, my foster parents had control, everybody else had control. I didn't have control. Only thing I could control was athletics and my schoolwork, and that's where I excelled. And so, I get that. But another question is, because the old man in me, the old country boy in me is, when is it a teenager coming into your office and you're like, okay, this is a real issue, or this is just a kid being a kid?
I think that they all feel like real issues to these kids. Yeah. And unfortunately, due to, social media as well, it's good and bad in a way in terms of mental health and diagnoses. There's a lot of, mental health support online, which is great, but there's also a lot of people out there being like, if you have this, and this symptom, you must have this diagnosis, which I hate more than anything in the world. Because, kids are changing and they're evolving, and you can't slap diagnoses on them left and right. And that also can't be used as a crutch either. A lot of kids will come into my office and be like, well, I just have anxiety, so I can't. No.
Yeah.
We're going to learn to do it even with the anxiety.
Yeah.
You can hold the feeling of anxiety and still do things. It's hard, but that's what you got to work through.
It's definitely hard.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the problems is, TikTok, especially all of their influencers, it's like everyone has a different mental health disorder. And they're like, oh, you hit 3 boxes, you're diagnosed as that. And it's like, no. No, it doesn't work like that. A lot of this is just normal, typical teenage stuff.
Yeah. And that's coming from being a teacher. I feel like I have a weird point of view of this because I grew up in the system. Mm-hmm. I am a teacher, and I was also a coach, and I played collegiately, and I coached at the collegiate level, and I've coached at the high school level and every level. And like, as a coach, my students knew me as one way. Yeah. But as a teacher, they knew me as a totally different way. And it was very hard to walk that line with them because they have different feelings, and they have different ways. Like, sometimes in class, I wanted to be coach, but they needed teacher version of me.
Right.
And sometimes on the basketball court, I wanted to be the teacher, but they needed coach. And it was, so I can't imagine how they deal with that when it comes to, am I hitting the right marks? Am I doing what I need to do? And then you got people who are always talking about them. Like one of the things I always told my kids as a coach was, when we win, it's all on you. It's all on you. Go have fun, go celebrate, do whatever. When we lose, coach sucks. I was like, that's okay. I was like, that's okay. I was like, if your parents ask you anything, if people on social media are saying anything, if your friends are blowing you up, I was like, you have the green light to say coach sucks, because I'm a grown man and I can take whatever they say. I was like, I don't need them coming at you like that.
Yeah. And I think that's something, when we look at social media, they're constantly comparing themselves to everybody else. And parents are too.
Yeah.
Parents are like, oh, look at what this kid just won and look at what this kid just did. And it's like, stop, just worry about your own stuff. Yeah. Easier said than done. But so much of their anxiety is also just related to that what is everyone else doing? And their social media lives are fake. They're just, they're not real.
And it's, oh man, as much as I dreaded my upbringing, because it was rough. It was rough. I went through some times, but like, I thank my grandfather for raising me the way he did, because he taught me at a young age about not everybody's going to like you. Not everybody's going to like you. Everybody's not going to agree with what you have to say. Like, you're just going to have to worry about yourself. And it took me a long time to really get to that. I got to that when I was probably around 24, 25. It's when I got to the point where I was just like, I don't care. Like, I don't care anymore. Like,
and it's really freeing. I actually write about that in my books about, not everyone's going to like you.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And if everyone likes you, that means you're a people pleaser and you're not being true to yourself anyway.
Yep.
So not everyone's going to like you. And by the way, you're not going to like everybody else either. And that's okay. You should always be a kind human being, but you do not need to be friends with everybody. And I think that's something that we forget when we try to make these kids emotionally responsible for everybody, in their community. And that's just can't be the case. Like, that's a lot of pressure to put on these kids. They're not going to like everybody. And that's fine. They don't need to be friends with everybody. Again, they should always be like a civil human being, but they're not going to be friends with everybody.
And that's a big thing. And it even comes into adulthood. Like I had this conversation on another podcast where I told him, I was like, bro, while I was talking, I said, hey, every level of life is just school. And he was like, what? He's like, what do you mean? I was like, well, I was like, in high school, you have your cliques. I was like, you have your cliques. You have the fun kids. You have the nerds. You have the athletes. You have those few kids that can bounce around and fit into every single group. I was like, you have those kids. I was like, but when you get older, you get into work, that's the same thing. I was like, you have those cliques. I was like, you have people who are the people that think work is a family, and then you think the people that are at work just to work, and then the people who are here. I was like, you're having to navigate through it all the time, and it can be very anxious. And that's something that I've had to learn with teaching, and especially being a male teacher in a very female dominant like career. It's very female dominant, and I've come to learn I work a lot better with older female teachers than I do with teachers my age, because I'm a very come to work, do my job, go home. I don't believe that work is family. I don't want to kick it with you at work. I don't care nothing about your life at home. I'm just like, hey, I'm here to do a job. I'm paid to do that job. That's what I do. The only connection I have at work is with my kids, because they need that connection. They need to be connected to me. Coworkers don't. I was like, so I get a lot of he's an asshole. He's a dick. He doesn't like anybody, and I was like, I'm not any of that. I'm actually a very nice person, but I don't come to work for that. And a lot of that stems from social media because social media has turned everything and everybody has to be friendly and they have to work together and build a family circle. And I'm like, no, that's not how life works. Like,
Right.
and if you're preaching that to kids, they're going to think that's how life works. And it doesn't work like that.
Right.
It is going to be a very rude awakening when they have to step into the real world.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I don't know that we're preparing these kids well to step into the real world. And I think
I don't
that's
think
an
so.
issue that we're seeing. Mm-hmm.
That was, I worked at a nonprofit for about 10 years. And me and the executive director, he was my mentor. He was like my father figure. I had known him since I was 15. For the last 6 years of his life, me and him lived right next door to each other, and we spent every day with each other. We had coffee every morning. We talked every day. But me and him had that conversation because he would always say, well, you came out of here very well adjusted and ready for the world. And I was like, y'all had nothing to do with that. I was like, that was my grandparents. I was like, they prepared me for that. I
Yeah.
was like, what you guys are doing is not, I was like, I hate to say it, but we're not preparing them to succeed. I was like, because you're painting it like it's a sugar cookie world, and it's not. I was like, and when people come hard on them, you guys don't like it, but the kids respect it because every kid craves structure. I was like, they crave that structure and a system. And I told them, I was like, as a kid who grew up in a system, the people that were super nice to me, I hated them with a passion. I was like, I couldn't stand them. I was like, but the people who were hard on me and like would get on to me about stuff, I was like, I respected them to this day because I knew they actually gave a damn about me because they were trying to change what I was doing. I was like, while the people who were super nice to me didn't give two shits about me. And they were just being nice because I was there. And I couldn't stand it.
Right. Well, that's the other thing, I think we need to start believing that these kids are capable because they are capable and
Yeah.
they're capable of doing things on their own and they're capable of succeeding. And I think parents sometimes forget that and then overdo for them and, don't let them take those risks that are important in life and try things. And, like if your kid is having a problem with the teacher, instead of the parent automatically emailing, like, have your kid advocate for themselves and talk to that teacher because they can do it. And I
Yeah.
think, sometimes we give this generation a lot of grief about what they can't do, but there's a lot of things they can do that we just don't allow them to at this point.
Yeah. So why did this become a passion for you?
I think it's because, when I went through high school, I always kind of wish that there was like that adult that you could talk to without judgment that would just be able
Yeah.
to like listen to like the stupid things you do as a kid, but be able to help guide you through
Mm-hmm.
that process. So I always really I enjoyed talking to all my friends who were going through things. And I always knew I wanted to be a therapist and work with, the teenage population. And that's what I've been doing. And I absolutely love it. And I'm very, very, thankful that I get to go to work and do that and to talk to these kids and they open up to me.
That's good. So as a teenager, describe Miss Keri Cooper as a teenager. Like what were
Oh,
you as a teenager?
I was a rebellious teen. I did not like school because it didn't come easy to me at all.
Yeah.
And I was really frustrated by it. So I didn't pay much attention to school. I was kind of, I live in northern New Jersey. So hopping on the bus and getting into New York City to go clubbing at night was a pretty easy process to do. And that's
Wow.
where I normally was most of my high school years.
Yeah. See, we were very different in high school. Like, I loved school. I loved it. I loved it because it did come very easy to me. And I was athletic, so that came very easy. And it was fun. I don't know why, but it was fun. I think, but I always tell my buddy, I was like, as much as I enjoyed it, I didn't enjoy the admiration. I didn't like it. I was like, I've never liked it. I was like, I didn't like people. praising me or saying my name. I couldn't stand it. Like I was just like, yeah, leave me alone. Like, like I remember in college. I wrote a paper for my English class, and I got an A on it. And one of my other buddies was struggling in the class, and the professor told them, they was like, you need to learn how to write like Cedric because Cedric is doing so well. And I didn't like that. I was like, nah. I was like, they don't need to come to me for that. I was like, that's why you're here. You're the teacher. That's your job. And so it like pissed me off because like now my friend came to me and they're like, I need to learn how to write. I'm like, nah, don't put that energy on me because of her. Like, and so like for the rest of the year, I purposely wrote bad papers.
Oh my
And
God.
she pulled me to the side and she was all like, why are you writing bad papers on purpose? She was like, I know how good of a writer you are. Why are you writing bad papers on purpose? And I was like, because you need to quit telling people to come to me for stuff. I was like, this ain't what I do. I was like, I don't like that. And she was like, she just laughed and she was like, you're going to be a teacher one day. And I was like, no, the hell I ain't. I was like, it's like, I ain't doing this. And then that's what I've been doing for the last 7 years. Been
Yeah.
teaching. It has been very rewarding. Very rewarding because it's a lot of fun to see these kids grow. But the teenagers, I'm trying to figure out with your holistic psychotherapist, do you talk to them in their preteens or do you wait until they're teenagers? Because a lot of times I feel like even when I was talking to my mentor and he was asking me about what type of kids we should bring in to the group home, I always told him preteens. And he was like, why? And I was like, because we can shape them. I was like, we can adjust them easier because once they hit their teens, they are who they are. And they're not going to, I was like, you can adjust it, but you can't really change it.
I don't know. I think they still change in their teens. I do see some kids as young as like 13, but my practice is busy, so I just can't fit a lot of kids in. So I tend to just work with the high schoolers because that's what I really enjoy. And I work with a ton of college kids as well, actually, because they still go through a whole lot.
So what is some simple steps you would tell a teen or a young adult to get through this time, like to get through the anxiety, the depression, the social media, I got to be like everybody else, or like, what would you tell?
I mean, I think so much of that is about, again, like worrying about what may or may not happen or about what already did happen or didn't happen. And I tell them all, I think one of the most important things is to learn to stay in the present moment. What's happening right now? What is the problem right now that I'm facing? Because those we can fix. If there's a problem right now, we can figure it out. We can problem solve that. But you can't problem solve a problem that may or may not happen in the future. So to stop worrying about all of that and to come back to the present moment, I think is one of the most important things. So really live in the present moment. Wake up in the morning and be like, okay, what's going on today for me? Who do I want to be today?
But what if they say, Miss Cooper, my present moment is a living hell? Like,
What's happening right now at this present moment that's making it like that? Right now, what's happening? And normally, it's not something that's happening right now.
Yeah, something from the past.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would be my simple, quick advice. But that's why, I wrote these books on this. I wrote books about mental health, and Mental Health Uncensored, 10 Foundations Every Parent Needs to Know is a book for parents about how they can help their kids. And then I wrote a workbook for the teens, Mental Health Uncensored, 10 Foundations Every Teen Needs to Know. And it takes you through 10 steps of how you need to get your life back on track, really. And how, 5 of them are physical and 5 of them are more mental health based. But it helps really set your daily habits in a good place.
So 2 things. 1, where can they find these books? And then 2, like, what's one of the mental things and what's one of the physical things?
Both books are on Amazon, so they're both under Mental Health Uncensored, 10 Foundations Every Parent Needs to Know and 10 Foundations Every Teen Needs to Know. One thing in the physical, which I absolutely love, it's my favorite because it's the simplest, is hydration. And I put a lot of research in there of how hydration and not being hydrated actually negatively impacts our mental health.
Yeah.
And one of the more mental health ones is being able to say no, whether
Okay.
that's obligations we don't want to friends we don't want, being able to have those boundaries. And it takes you through steps about, how are your boundaries and are you saying yes more than you want to be? So those are two great steps in the book.
And those are two very great steps to have. That's very great. Well, Miss Cooper, thank you so much for being on this episode of Conversing Over Drinks. And I would just like to say thank you once again to everyone who has been listening and everyone who has been watching the episode. I appreciate you guys so much. And I appreciate Miss Keri Cooper for being on the episode. This has been Conversing Over Drinks with your host, Cedric Turner. Peace. I'm out.